Hey everybody, this is a little piece by Theodore W. Adorno titled Theses Against Occultism. 1. The attraction to the occult is a symptom of the retrogression of consciousness. Consciousness has lost the strength to think the absolute and to bear the conditional. Rather than conceptually determining both in terms of unity and difference, consciousness mixes them indiscriminately. The absolute becomes a fact, the conditional becomes unmediated being, Wesenschaft. Wesenhaft. Monotheism disintegrates into a second mythology. In a social psychology study in the U.S., a respondent said, quote, "I believe in astrology because I don't believe in God," end quote. Moral reason, bracket, Rex Prehende Vernunft, end bracket, which had raised itself to the idea of the one God, seems to have rushed into his fall. Spirit dissociates itself into spirits, and in the process loses the ability to see that they do not exist. Society's veiled forces to calamity fool its victims with false prophecy, with hallucinatory phenomenon. Their fragmentary plausibility makes the victim hope in vain that they be able to face and resist total disaster. After millennia of enlightenment, panic once again breaks out over humanity, whose domination over nature, by turning into domination over man, surpasses all the horrors that man ever had to fear from nature. 2. The second mythology is more untrue than the first, bracket, i.e. monotheism, end bracket. The first was the sedimentation of the state of knowledge of its epoch, each of which showing consciousness as somewhat more emancipated from the blind forces of nature than the preceding one. The second mythology, disturbed and numbed, throws off the previously gained knowledge in the midst of a society which, through the all-pervasive exchange relations, juggles away the very elements over which the occultists claim to have power. The navigators glanced to the Dioscuri, the trees being animated and alive in spring. Sorry, I'm going to look up. Dioscuri means sons of Zeus. In Greek and Roman mythology, twin deities who secured shipwrecked sailors and received sacrifices for favorable winds. They were the children of Leda and either Zeus, the king of the gods, or Tyndareus, Leda's mortal husband and king of Lacedaemon. So, yeah, I don't know what the reference there is. Anyway, the navigators glanced to the Dioscuri, the trees being animated and the enlivened spirit, bracket, die Belzerlung vom Baum und Quelle? I'm not sure. All the compulsive fascination with the unexplained, these are historically adequate to the subject's experience of the objects of his action. But as a rationally accountable reaction against the rationalized society in the booths and consulting rooms of fortune tellers, bracket, Geisterseher, end bracket, all shades, this reborn animism denies the very alienation that it itself has generated and thrives on, and it substitutes non-existing experience. The occultist draws the ultimate conclusion from the fetishism of commodities. Labor, frightfully objectified, jumps from the objects in innumerable devilish masks. Everything is forgotten in a world frozen into a commodity. Its having been produced by human beings becomes cut off, wrongly remembered, added on and equated to the objects in themselves as being in itself. Because the objects have frozen under the light of reason, because they have lost the illusion of being animated, what animates them, their social quality, becomes reified as natural, supernatural, as a thing among things. 3. In late capitalism, the regression to magical thinking is readily assimilated. The system's shady, asocial, marginal phenomenon, the pitiful stagings for a peek through cracks in its walls, certainly reveal nothing of what lays outside, but all the more the forces of inner decay. Those little wise men who terrorize their clients behind their crystal balls are toy models of the big ones, who hold the fate of mankind in their hands. Society itself is as antagonistic and scheming as the shady characters from psychic research. The hypnosis exerted by occult objects resembles totalitarian terror. Over time, they become one and the same. The augurs, sorry, I don't know what that means, Augurs. An augur is a priest and official in the classical Roman world. His main role is the practice of augury, the interpretation of the will of the gods by studying events he observed within a predetermined sacred space. The templum corresponded to the heavenly space above. So, the augurs, laughing at one another, has exploded into the scornful laughter of society at itself. It gloats in the soul's immediate material exploitation. The horoscope corresponds to the central office's directives to the citizens, and the mystique of numbers prepares for administrative statistics and price fixing. Ultimately, integration reveals itself as the ideology of disintegration into power groups exterminating each other. Whoever gets into it is lost. 4. Occultism is a reflex to the subjectification of all meaning, the complement of reification. If objective reality appears deaf to the living as never before, then they try to lure some meaning out of objective reality by abracadabra. Indiscriminately, meaning is attributed to whatever comes next. The rationality of reality, die Vernünftigkeit des Wirklichen, which does not quite make sense anymore, is replaced by floating tables glowing behind earth mounds. For the diseased consciousness, the refuse from the world of appearances becomes the mundus intelligibilis. It is almost the speculative truth, as Kafka's Adradek is almost an angel, and yet in a positivism omitting the mediation of thought is only the barbarically insane. Objectified subjectivity thus misperceiving itself in the object. The more complete the crudeness of what passes as, quote, spirit, and the Enlightenment subject would, of course, immediately recognize itself in anything spiritual, Bezaelt, end bracket. The more does the sensed meaning, actually altogether lacking, become the unconscious compulsive projection of the decaying subject, if not clinically, then historically. It wants the world to conform to its own decay. This is why it has to do with props and bad wishes. Quote, the third of them, she reads my palm, once reading my misfortune. Die dritte liest mir aus der Hand. Sie will mein Unglück lesen. In the occult, the spirit groans under its own curse like a dreamer having a nightmare. His torture grows with the feeling that he is dreaming, yet he is unable to wake up and get over it. 5. Like fascism, the power of the occult is not just a pathos, bracket, patish, end bracket. The two being related by a model of thought as in the case of anti-Semitism. Rather, in the lesser panacea, like in mock-ups, consciousness starving for truth believes to grasp an insight that it is vaguely aware of. Official progress, however, willfully prevents it from doing so. This truth is that by virtually excluding the possibility of spontaneous change, bracket, Umschlag, end bracket, society gravitates toward total catastrophe. The real absurdity is reproduced within astrology, which presents the opaque relations among alienated elements. There is nothing more than the stars as knowledge about the subject. The threat read out of the constellation is similar to the historical one, which keeps on wallowing in the unconscious, in the non-subject. To be prospective victims of a whole solely of their own making can be tolerated only by projecting this whole away from themselves onto something similar and external to it. The pitiful nonsense, the empty horror which they carry on, permits them to release the shapeless misery, the stark fear of death. Yet, at the same time, they can suppress it further, as they have to if they want to go on living. The break in the lifeline indicating a lurking cancer is phony only for where it is claimed, in the palm of the individual. It would be correct for the collective, however, where no diagnosis is made. Naturally enough, the occultists feel attracted by the childishly monstrous fantasies of the natural sciences. The confusion they generate between their emanations and uranium isotopes is the ultimate clarity. The mystical rays are modest anticipations of the technical. Superstition is insight because superstition sees together the ciphers of destruction scattered on the social surface. Superstition is foolish because in superstition's death instinct, superstition still holds on to illusions. From the transfigured society whose forms it has projected into the skies, it promises itself the answer that could only come from real society. Six, occultism is the metaphysics of the dopes. The subalternity of the medium is no less accidental than the apocrypha. I don't know what that means. Apocryphal. I hear that word, but I don't know what it means. Of a story or statement of doubtful authenticity, although widely circulated as being true. Apocrypha are biblical or related writings not forming part of the accepted canon of Scripture. While some might be of doubtful authorship or authenticity, in Christianity the word apocryphal was first applied to writings which were to be read privately rather than in the public context of church services. So anyway, the subalternity of the medium is no less accidental than the apocrypha, the silliness of what is revealed. Since the early days of spiritualism, the beyond has conveyed nothing more essential than the greetings from the deceased grandmother, along with the prophecy that a trip would lie ahead. The excuse that the spiritual world could communicate to the poor human mind only what it is able to comprehend is equally silly, an auxiliary hypothesis of the paranoid system. The lumen naturale did go further than the trip to the grandmother, and if the spirits do not wish to take notice of this, they are then ill-mannered gnomes, contact with whom should be broken off. The dull naturalist content of the supernatural message gives away its untruth. While chasing in the beyond after what is lost, all they run into is their own nothingness. in order to hang on to the gray everyday life where they are at home as incorrigible realists. The meaning they cherish becomes adjusted to the meaninglessness from which they escape. The rotten tricks are nothing but the rotten existence which they brighten. This is how they make it so comfortable for reasonable people. Facts that differ from what is the case only by not being such are used as the fourth dimension. Their non-being is precisely their qualitas occulta. They provide feeble-mindedness with a Weltanschauung. Like lightning, astrologers and occultists have a quick answer to any question. The answer does not really solve anything, but, by crude phrasings, prevents any possible solution. Conceived like space, their sublime region needs as little reflection as chairs and vases. Thus it reinforces conformity. Nothing pleases what exists more than existence as such should be meaning. Seventh thesis. As with the Jewish religion after the commandment against making images, Bilderverbot, Wilderverbot maybe, the great religions have either imposed silence concerning the salvation of the dead, or they taught the resurrection of the body. They are in earnest about the inseparability of the spiritual and the corporeal. There was no intention or anything, quote, spiritual, which was not somehow grounded in bodily perception, and in turn demanded bodily fulfillment. This is too crude for occultists who fancy themselves above the idea of resurrection and who actually do not want salvation at all. Their metaphysics, which even Huxley cannot distinguish from metaphysics, with a capital M, any more, rest on the axiom, quote, the soul, it does surge high, diddly-da, the body, it stays on the sofa. The more cheerful the spirituality, the more mechanistic. Not even Descartes has made such a clean separation. Division of labor and reification are driven to the brink. Body and soul are cut apart as in perennial vivisection. The soul is neatly cut out in order to continue its busy activity in lighter regions, precisely where the soul was interrupted. But through such a declaration of independence, the soul becomes a cheap imitation of what the soul had wrongly emancipated itself from. Instead of reciprocity, Wechselwirkung, as claimed by even the most rigid philosophy, the astral body conforms, the distinguishing concession of reified spirit to its counterpart. The conception of pure spirit can only be grasped as analogous to the body, and at the same time the analogy negates Aufheben and the pure spirit. The reification of the spirits is enough to negate them. Section 8. They bitch about materialism, but they want to weigh the astral body. The objects of their interest are both to transcend the possibility of experience and to be experienced. It is supposed to happen strictly scientifically. The greater the humbug, the more careful the organization of research. The pompousness of scientific control is led ad absurdum where there is nothing to control. The same rationalist and empiricist apparatus that did away with spirits is turned onto, again, pressure, the spirits on those who no longer believe in their own ratio. Of course, every ordinary spirit would flee from the trap set to control nature, which, as such, get in its way. But the occultists turn even this to their own use. Since spirits do not like controls, a little door must be left open for spirits so that spirits can make their entrance unmolested in the midst of all the security precautions. Occultists are practical people. They are not driven by idle curiosity, they seek clues. It is a quick switch from the stars to the business transaction. Usually the message suggests that misfortune enters the house along with some poor friends who are hoping for something. Thesis 9. The cardinal sin of occultism is that by making existence an attribute of spirit, both become contaminated. Spirit sprang from existence as an organ to keep itself alive, but by reflecting itself in the spirit, existence also became other. The existing negates itself as self-reflection, Eingedenken. Such negation is the characteristic of spirit. In turn, to ascribe to it positive existence, even at a higher order, would be handing it over to that against which it stands. The ideology of the late bourgeoisie made spirit once again into something that it was during pre-animism, a being in itself, consistent with the social division of labor, the break between physical and mental labor, the manipulative domination over the latter. Ontologically, this privilege is justified by consciousness in the concept of the spirit in itself and is eternalized by objectifying the concept over and above the social principle constituting it. In occultism, such ideology explodes. In a way, occultism is idealism come into its own spirit. Precisely because of the rigid antithesis between being and spirit, spirit becomes a province of being. If idealism insisted that only for the whole, the idea, being should be spirit, and that spirit should exist, then occultism draws from this the absurd conclusion that existence, Sein, means determinate being, Dasein. Quote, according to the manner of its becoming, determinate being in general is being with a not being, so that this latter is taken up into a simple unity with being, not being taken up into being, in this manner that the concrete whole is in the form of being, of immediacy, constitutes determinateness as such. End quote. Hegel, Wissenschaft der Logik, Volume 1. The occultists take literally the not being as in a, quote, simple unity with being, end quote, and their type of concreteness is a phony shortcut on the way from the whole to the determinate, claiming that the whole once determined is no more. They shout to metaphysics, capital M, hic rhodus hic salta. They feel that if the philosophical clothing of spirit with being should determine itself, then any fragmented existence should ultimately qualify as concrete spirit. The idea of the existence of the spirit, the most extreme height of the bourgeois consciousness, would then already teleologically carry the belief in spirits, ghosts, exclamation point. The most extreme crudeness. The transition to existence, always, quote, positive and a justification of the world, implies at the same time the thesis of the positivism of the spirit, the spirit's arrest, the transposition of the absolute into appearances. Whether the whole world of things as, quote, commodity should be spirit, or anything should be any spirit, becomes indifferent, and the world spirit becomes the highest spirit, the guardian angel of the existing, the deranged. This is what the occultists live on. Their mysticism is the enfant terrible, I don't know how you say that. Enfant terrible of Hegel's mystical element. They push speculation to fraudulent bankruptcy. By passing off determinate being as spirit, they submit the objectified spirit to the test for survival, and the outcome must be negative. There is no spirit.